welcome to Trauma Informed Conversations, the podcast about trauma, healing and hope. Well, hello everyone. It's amazing to have you back with us. Today's conversation is one that I've really been looking forward to for such a long time. Okay, maybe like a week, because I have got the wonderful Carrie with me, who I'm going to be having a little chat about the BBC Breakfast appearance. So it's brilliant to have Carrie with us, and then we'll really then start to kind of unpick a little bit about, sort of what happened in that interview. So Carrie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, and being on the other side of the podcast.
Absolutely. You've been doing a brilliant job, Carrie, of hosting. So yeah, now you get to kind of feel what it's like for the others who have been interviewed by you, maybe. Let's start then with the question that is on everyone's lips, I think, and you probably had it a lot this week. But what was it like sitting on the couch?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So it's not the first time I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been on a couple of times, but this is the first time where it was just me, and they reached out around wanting to speak about the wider issues that care experience people face when they leave the care system and are essentially forced into being adults. So very much linked to obviously my PhD that I'm doing around financial needs of care experienced people in transition to adulthood. Really long title. And obviously the wider work that I do in general as well. So yeah, it's a really lovely opportunity to share some really, I think, key insights and looking at it from a systematic view. I think that's really, really important when we're looking at these issues that are so surrounded by trauma and things that we have to try and fix in our working lives.
Absolutely. And for those of you who may have missed it, who might be thinking, oh no, like what are they talking about? So you were talking, Carrie, weren't you, about some of the challenges facing care experienced young people? So, what would your elevator pitch be in terms of maybe those who haven't seen the interview? Like, what were you talking about?
Yeah, so I think the main kind of areas that I was talking about was around the fact that we're essentially setting up young people who have been through so much trauma, from removal from their parents to, sometimes experiencing trauma in the care system, to then being forced to act as an adult very early on in age, from like 16 in some cases, and not being given the resources and support that they need to do that. So, my PhD research was all about the financial need, and I said on the interview, the reason why that really motivated me was that I kept hearing, oh, care leavers and care experienced people, they're just poor at budgeting. So if they just budgeted better, then they'd have a better experience. And I was just like, that's not it. There's so much more to it. That's such a simplistic way of explaining trauma, of explaining I guess the lack of resources available as well.
Absolutely. I think the thing that struck me, Carrie, and correct me if my aging memory is wrong, but did you not say that it's £3,000, this so-called budget that we're expected to work with? Is that right?
That's the setting up home grant, yeah. So that only increased like this year from 2000, or maybe last year. The years have merged into one.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, £3,000 is a setting up home grant, and it's up to as well, and so it's not guaranteed. And that's an issue in itself, because young people are facing situations where local authorities can be like, oh well, you don't need all of this, or etc. And part of my research was to calculate a minimum income standard for care leavers, where we took the standard single working age minimum income standard, which is a massive project ran at my university, at Loughborough University, and it influences things like the living wage, all sorts of stuff. I was speaking to my supervisor this morning, and he was literally in Geneva on Monday, talking about a global minimum income. So that's the kind of the framework.
Wow, okay.
So it's very robust, and so part of that was working with care experienced people to figure out what they needed, in their homes, and to live a life of dignity. And what I was talking about what I briefly mentioned in the interview, but the research is much more than that, is the fact that just for those basic household items for a single bedroom flat, and we have all the measurements of, the average size, etc., is over £10,000. And the Leaving Care grant just doesn't take into account so many of the things that are needed. And what I didn't speak about, even because it was a very short time.
I think you have 5 minutes or
Yeah,
something.
5 minutes.
Yeah, not long.
It segued into plants on a boat, which was very strange segue into news. But things like moving costs. So that was something that I calculated in with my research with the young people, because it costs to move. You have things like van hire. Also, really importantly, items to move with. So boxes. Um,
Yes.
and that was really, really important, especially for the care experience people that I spoke with, because so often, still, after so many years of campaigning and so much amazing work that is done in the sector, like with Mudlug and their amazing bags for children in care,
Fabulous.
they're still people are still expected to move with bin bags,
Yeah, absolutely.
and that's traumatizing. That is, it's a massive issue around self-worth, self-dignity when your items are put into bin bags. So it's really important to include that in that. um, and it's just not something that's particularly taken into account when budgets are thought of young people with care experience entering the adult world.
Absolutely. And, we worked together for a while now, Carrie, and I just find it really surprising every time I hear you say that, maybe in training or, it's how is this happening? And so what I'm hearing then really is that, it's great, isn't it? Let's teach young people to be independent. Let's support them to manage their own money. But you can't do that when it's not even enough to really cover those basics. So thank you, Carrie. Yeah.
Yeah, even just calculating like food needs, that's not even
No,
covered, because we expect young people to go onto the benefit system, which
well,
isn't
of
adequate enough
course.
anyway.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then one of the really important things that my research does do is it takes into account stability,
Yeah.
and that it has different calculations of need linked to stability.
Wow.
Because if somebody is moving more, and if somebody has not got a stable home and a suitable home, then it's going to cost them more money to live. And I don't think that people really were aware of that, and the trauma that that creates of one, this compound trauma that they're then facing, of you're thrown into, you've got to be an adult now because you're 18 and we've legally decided that, to you have very little support network in comparison to your your non-care peers, and this is a lack of family privilege, to then, if you are then facing disability and maybe some additional needs like health or parenting, or involvement with the criminal justice system, those needs compound, and then the costs compound, and then the instability, and it's just a roller coaster. And it's, how are we then supporting these young people? And they're the ones falling through the gaps.
They really are. And Carrie, you must have read my mind because my next question was going to be about family privilege. So for those of you who did miss the interview with Carrie, Carrie was, yeah, you were sort of talking, weren't you, about that concept of family privilege. And again, I'll let you kind of elaborate on that in a moment. But for me, I find it incredible that we're not really independent at 16, 18, 21, are we? Even in some cases. Carrie, I don't know whether you want to kind of elaborate in terms of, yeah, what family privilege is and, how it sort of relates really to this area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I started my research, I knew there was something like missing. I was like, there's something that's undercurrent, right? That really is at play here. And I was like, oh, I think it's family privilege, because we hear about like a family support, etc. I was like, it's a privilege though to have that family. And I was like, I wonder if anybody else come to this conclusion? Surely not. Surely someone must have thought about this. So I was like, right, Google Scholar, like let's do. I did my deep dive of academic, and quite quickly found that it had been defined by lo and behold a care experienced researcher,
Ah,
um,
okay.
John Sieta, who's an American researcher. and he'd written about family privilege, and I will read the definition, or I'll it's quite a long one, so I will here we go. So family privilege is an invisible package of assets, pathways that provides us with a sense of belonging, safety, unconditional love, and spiritual values. With family privilege, children observe parents or older siblings to see the effort it takes to be successful in life. Family privilege provides a chance to hope and dream. And that last line always hits me. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
oh.
absolutely,
And it's,
absolutely.
they're invisible, and the first line of it is defined by as the benefits mostly invisible that come from the membership in a stable family.
Wow. And I think
People,
it's something people often take for granted, I think don't really realize sometimes, the importance of, maybe having someone that you can turn to unconditionally when things go wrong or, when we mess up as we do invariably do, as human beings, actually, where do you go?
and that's why it's coined, I think, family privilege, because and
Yep.
it's an unconscious bias, I think, that impacts so much of the way in which systems are built, and especially support around care experienced people and other people facing poverty and and those kinds of support, because the people creating those policies, if they thought about how they were responding to the issue and taking into account their family privilege and their expectation within that of, oh, well, I would be fine with that, or, oh, I'm not even going to think of that because I've never had to deal with that. So never having to think about moving on my own, never having to think about the cost of storage if I need somewhere, because if I move somewhere, if I decide to go abroad or go on holiday, then I can just store some stuff in my parents' shed or whatever, or I can not even have to take every single item that I own with me every time I want to move, because all the stuff is in my parents' attic. If and when, when you're 14, your mum goes, oh, actually, I've got them school books I probably want to give to you. Like, it's so much that's just
Yeah.
not taken into account.
Oh,
And
really?
when we're linking it to that responsibility that we're giving young people, we're not giving, we're forcing that responsibility on them at a young age. This is not what the general public have, because you will have generally support until your parents and your family are not around anymore.
Absolutely. And I don't want to get neurosciencey about it. The thing that I don't understand is, how, the prefrontal cortex and, kind of other aspects of the brain, associated with that aren't really properly forming until the early 20s anyway. And that's, in, perhaps a young person's brain who maybe hasn't gone through care experience and so on. It still baffles me, how we're then expecting a young person to be able to leave care standing on their own 2 feet and just at the click of, a button or a snap of their fingers, know how to navigate the adult world.
Yeah, with absolutely, very, very little guidance in all of that
Yes,
as well. And I
yes.
think, a lot of research and a lot of the, I guess, agenda over the years has been about how do we get these young people to be better at this? How do we give them more resilient? How do we train them to be better prepared? And it's like, okay, but that's not a trauma-informed way of
No,
looking, because actually you're putting the problem on the person who's experiencing it. And
absolutely.
that's traumatic in itself.
Yeah, and I'm really glad we've had this conversation because I almost thought that I was wrong for, having heard the interview and kind of coming away with it with we're forcing independence, but that is exactly what we're doing.
Oh, yeah, 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 absolutely. And it baffles me, it really does, that we're still having these conversations, you know, and some things have been done, over the policy years. Let's extend foster care a little bit, but not really foster care, because it's staying put. So then it's not supported the same way, and you can't go back. And it just, and we briefly spoke about this. I briefly spoke about this with in the first podcast with Lisa and Ian around that
Yes.
trauma system of, it just isn't looking at things in a trauma informed way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you haven't listened to that first podcast, please do. I think there's so much covered in that, so much goodness. I know, and a lot of the feedback we've had from that one has been, really, really warm, and positive, in terms of, kind of really unpicking in a bit more depth, more depth than what we're able to do now. I just wanted to say, Carrie, that I'm just so thankful that you're doing this research at all, and hopefully through this piece, we'll then be starting to shine the light much more on, what is a massive issue and potentially, perhaps that might feed poverty, it increases risk tenfold at least. There's so much more, isn't there, that, kind of needs to be, sort of uncovered with that. I was going to move us on a little bit though, due to our kind of shared passion of research. As you know, Carrie, I'm doing a PhD as well, although in a very, very different topic to yours.
Yeah.
So mine is around children and young people and eating disorders and school-based prevention. But I think the thing that unites us both is our love for research. And had a conversation a couple of months ago, didn't we, about there just seems to be a lack of kind of resources and appropriate training for researchers, for educators. And then
Yeah.
you had a real Alice goes down the rabbit hole moment, Carrie, didn't you? And so I was
Oh God.
woken up to lots of early Sunday morning or early on a Saturday morning emails and you'd been a bit of a busy bee, hadn't you?
Yes. Yeah, I think I've always been aware of it. And I think definitely when you do a big piece of research like a PhD, and where you have to look at so many other pieces of work and how they've done it and how are you going to do your research and how is that going to be the same or different. What really was highlighted for me was and I've always kind of had an inclination of this anyway with other work that I've done, was around, I guess, that trauma-informed approach to research, especially around kind of co-producing and participation within research. And I did speak to, Nikki Luke from the Reese Centre about this as well. That's what that podcast is all about, the importance of that kind of work. And so I was like, okay, well, I never had access to any of that training. Like I've had to stumble along the way and be like, and just I guess being around the people that I've been around and in the field of this trauma reform stuff of saying no, that isn't the right way to do this. I've been like, I think I need to write this. I think I need to do this into training and make it available to people because actually it's really important if we're going to be, I guess, creating new knowledge in a way that's trauma informed that actually has a positive impact on the experiences and I guess the way that we tell the stories as well around the people that we're working with, that we need to do it in a trauma informed way. So yeah, I did go down a big rabbit hole and changed I think our conversation was on maybe the Friday, and then by Sunday I was like, here is here is a fully fledged plan of
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, yeah, so what we're talking about then is the researcher and educator suite. Yeah, and so we've got research and evaluation, education curriculum design. I think there's bits there for higher and further education staff, isn't there? And co-production, that term that's kind of, sort of banded around a lot lately, I think. And then even bits around system and organizational development too.
Yeah, so as you know, I'm a very kind of systems-based person and I like to do the detail, but also I have to make sure that we're pulling the lens out and saying actually we can do that work, but also the systematic stuff is really important too. Because if you don't have that systematic understanding, then very little is then going to change on the ground. But yeah, it was really important for me to kind of, especially with my research, like to provide space for people to get that training in a trauma informed way, to be able to create research that has a positive impact for the people they're doing it with hopefully, not on. Because so often, co-production is counted as having a survey or having an advisory group that looks at your data twice. Like that is
Oh,
production.
yes, it's true. And then that information never gets used. So it's like, how can we improve? Oh, thank you for that. We're not going to. Yeah, no, I hear you, Carrie. And I think, what kind of particularly excites me about that suite is that so we're stretching trauma reform practice beyond frontline services, aren't we, into them really thinking about, yeah, how we can really truly hear people's voices, in appropriate ways as well. So if you were to just kind of give one kind of key thing, Carrie,
Oh
about
God.
why I know I'm like limiting you. No, about why that sweet is important. Like, what would it be?
I think
Like one good thing.
give me a second. I've had some coffee. So I think it's the importance of it is because if we are wanting to be sharing new ideas and new ways of learning and exploring the issues that, not just care experience people face, but any other people, and the research that we do that involves people. We need to be doing that in a way that involves properly those voices, because at the end of the day they're experts in that. And also, I think being really clear is that we shouldn't be expecting, within that co-production, we don't need to expect people to share their trauma either. It's really but also, if we're teaching as well, so that's why it's the research and teacher educator, we need to be thinking about how we teach about topics. Are we teaching with the expectation that there might be a care experienced person in that room? Is what I'm saying actually not very good language? Is this language in which we use healing? Is it going to traumatize them? And is that helping the whole agenda of trying to change the system in the way that we do it? And then it's, a part of that of the support staff as well, especially in higher education and further education, where they don't have to be dedicated roles, but actually they are people that have a lot of interaction with care leavers who very often have had so many broken relationships that it's going to be harder for them to trust them. And it's just giving guidance to them about how they can best interact and support those students as well, because all of those barriers to get there in the first place is a lot. So we need to do the best that we can to then support the staff so they can support them too. So I just want everyone to be trauma informed and support
Yeah.
you in a lovely way, and roses and whatnot, in a very crazy world that we live in right now.
Oh, 100%. And
More
maybe
than
if
one
we
line,
come back,
sorry.
oh, no problem. And if we come back full circle,
Yeah,
I would break out into a bit of Lion King, Circle of Life, but I will save our listeners from that. I can't sing. But to connect us back then to Care Experience, which obviously was the group that you were advocating for on BBC Breakfast.
yeah.
How do you think then that, sort of trauma reform research and education might then help to sort of design systems that would genuinely protect and support and empower those that are then transitioning into adulthood, which I think was the beginning of our conversation, wasn't it?
So I think what was really important, and I think what I really felt after the BBC interview, um, because the way in which I did the research was in trauma informed way. I tried to present my data in a trauma informed way, was a huge level of recognition of being heard within the care community. And like the last few days, for me, that has just been absolutely, it's been amazing. It's been amazing to see. It's been amazing to feel. And, for me, in that moment, I don't care about anything else in that moment, because I know that the way in which it was presented resonated with my community. And that's what's important, because actually that feels like I've done it right.
Yeah.
So, because it involved them throughout all of the research, and the way in which I use language and communicate that, it's not putting blame on them. And, I had people in the 70s saying, yeah, I had this experience and it was all put on me.
Oh, wow. Goodness
Of
me.
all ages, contacting to say, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for presenting it in such a way. And if we're wanting to create change, we need to be doing that. We need to, regardless of whether it's, talking about systematic issues or whatever, you need to be, if you're communicating it in a trauma-informed way, in a co-produced way, then it's going to be so much more closely aligned to actually the experiences.
Of course it is, and thank you, Carrie. I think it's been such a powerful conversation, and I've really relished, the opportunity to kind of unpick things a little bit further, because I imagine it probably felt like you were on the couch in the studio for a lifetime, but
No, it's so
5 minutes, did it go quickly? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Oh,
sat in the green room longer, knocking over glasses
wow.
of water.
Oh no. Not good. But before we close, yeah, I just wanted to kind of really appreciate then that, this topic really, it just, resonates with everybody, doesn't it? From policymakers to educators to carers to, literally everybody. So thank you so much, Carrie, and also to everyone listening. If you do want to learn more about trauma-informed research, teaching, system change, any of that good stuff, then do hop onto the TICS website, and you're looking for the little tab called the Trauma-Informed Researcher and Educator Suite. So until next time, everybody, thank you to Carrie and thank you to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. To learn more, visit the Trauma Informed Consultancy Services website. We'll see you next time.